initiative. Right. And I'd like to welcome you all to our 2021 annual general meeting, which once again is being held as a Zoom call. In terms of quorum, I was worried about that, but we're in very good shape. It looks like we have 28 members have called in, and we have 12 proxy votes that were received by email. So that takes us well over the 20 that we needed for a quorum. So congratulations and thank you all for being here. I hope you have an interesting evening. So I'm going to start out just by putting up the agenda. Is everybody seeing that?
Yep, I see it, John.
Good, thank you. So hands up, how many people noticed that when I sent this out originally, I had 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock for times, because that was copied off last year. That's been corrected. So we're going to start out this evening just with the sort of the formalities of the annual general meeting, which is what's required. Approval of the minutes. I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation report. We'll have a treasurer's report from Paul Appeal. Elections of the 2021 Board of Directors that Cheryl Anderson is going to run. We'll then have some questions and discussion about all of that. Then we'll adjourn the AGM and we'll welcome our fantastic guest speaker, Leora Berman. So I will go from here then to ask for approval of the minutes. So I'm just going to get out of screen sharing for a minute. And we'll do approval of the minutes and all the other motions on this agenda by the reverse approval method. So if anybody, the minutes were circulated a few weeks ago. If anybody opposes the minutes the way they were written, would you speak up now? Otherwise, we'll assume everybody is in favor.
So right one is on mute. So if you are against, just unmute yourself.
So seeing no objection, I just.
And if you have if you have issues, use the chat box.
Yeah, that's true too. You could use the chat box. So could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the minutes?
Motion to move the minutes is be accepted as it.
I can second that.
Sorry, who was the seconder?
Cheryl Chapman.
Cheryl Chapman. So John Foster moves, Cheryl Chapman seconds, and we've had no objection. So that's great. So from here then, I'm going to go into my presentation. Okay, so some of this will be a bit of a review because there are certainly some people here this evening who haven't attended one of these presentations before. So of course, we are the South Shore Joint Initiative, and our mission as always is working to protect the biodiversity of the South Shore's marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And of course, the map on this slide shows the boundary of the important bird and biodiversity area, the South Shore important bird and biodiversity area. So why should we save the South Shore? Well, lots of Ontario is pretty wild, and you're going to be hearing more about some of that area from Leora later on. But in Southern Ontario, biodiversity loss has been greatest and conservation opportunities are extremely limited. But the Prince Edward County South Shore is the last undeveloped shoreline on the North Shore of Lake Ontario, and protection of the South Shore is vital to maintaining natural habitat home to at least 41 species at risk. Last year at this time, we talked about 33 species at risk. Well, we're up to 41 and counting. I'm sure we'll find some rare lichen or something any day now and increase that number. So protecting the South Shore helps to provide an important contribution to biodiversity and mediate the effects of climate change. And of course, Prince Edward County South Shore is a critical migratory bird flyway. So here is the conservation status for protected and public lands of the South Shore now. So again, the red outline is the outline of the IBA, which is our area of interest. And in green are the protected and soon to be protected areas. You can see that we're getting a pretty darn good chunk of the South Shore into protection, and various types of protection. So what's interesting is to look at the origins of the various areas. So back on that map, the Little Bluff Conservation Area, well, that's owned by and run by Quinte Conservation under a mandate provided by the province. The Prince Edward Point National Wildlife Area, where the Bird Observatory operates, is owned and run by the federal government, and that's managed by the Canadian Wildlife Service. Ducks Unlimited property, well, that's privately owned by Ducks Unlimited. The Ostrander Point Crown Land Block and Point Peter Provincial Wildlife Area are owned by currently by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests, MNRF, of the province. The Miller Family Nature Reserve, owned and operated by the Hastings Prince Edward Land Trust, and the Hudgen Rose property and the Maple Cross Coastline Reserve by Nature Conservancy Canada. So you can see we really have a wide variety of government and private interests in the conservation, and we're creating a pretty darn good patchwork. So just a little background. Since 2018, Ssji has held 2 successful workshops, bringing together representatives of local, provincial, and national organizations to develop strategy and build coalitions. Many of you on this call this evening have been part of those meetings. We had 2 local symposia, which examined the natural and cultural heritage of South Shore and explored a new vision for the area based on protecting it for traditional uses. We've carried out South Shore strolls and Day of the Monarch, have invited participants to learn more about the IBA by traveling its various trails and roadways. We put on numerous webinars, the Ssji Presents series in the COVID era over the last year. And we've received significant grant from the 3 Ontario foundations to fund our campaign to achieve conservation reserve status for the Ostrander Point Crown Land Block and the Point Peter Provincial Wildlife Area. And we have ongoing administrative support from Nature Canada. Really want to point out our collaboration with the Nature Conservancy Canada through Mark Stab, who's the regional director.
This is the
Somebody's not muted.
yeah, this is
Nature Conservancy Canada was selected by the federal government in the 2018 budget as a conduit for land acquisition funds, and they've been using them wisely and in our area. They've acquired, this should now say, 4 properties in Prince Edward County. The Hudgen Rose property, of course, the Brodeur property, which is now known as the Maple Cross Coastline Reserve, the Mark Bass Nature Reserve, and most recently, the McMahon Bluff area of natural scientific interest is their latest acquisition to become a reserve. Of course, the Hudgen Rose property came with the original 1865 heritage designated log house. Ssji agreed to look after the house, restore it, and use it for field studies, etc. And there, of course, is the iconic Hudgen House. So our major initiative over the last year in particular has been the Crown Land Initiative, taking our 2 chunks of Crown land and turning them into a conservation reserve. The important point to understand is Ostrander Point and Point Peter are currently not protected. But under the Provincial Parks and Conservation Reserves Act of 2006, they can become a conservation reserve, and that confers these points on them. as a conservation reserve that will permanently protect representative ecosystems, biodiversity, and significant elements of Ontario's natural and cultural heritage. Will provide opportunities for ecologically sustainable land uses, including traditional outdoor heritage activities and associated economic benefits, and will allow for scientific research and provide points of reference to support monitoring of ecological change on the broader landscape. So that's what we're expecting to achieve. So what did we do in 2020? Well, we carried out, and many of you participated in this and watched it happen, a multifaceted media and social media and letter writing campaign in support of our Crown lands becoming conservation reserve. We produced the beautiful and fact-filled guide to the South Shore, available at the libraries, liquor stores, and whatever other location Cheryl Anderson manages to drop off piles of them at. We produce 2 professional videos, which are used on social media. We produce on a bi-monthly basis the South Shoreliner newsletter. Thank you, John Foster. We put on webinars and South Shore strolls and the Day of the Monarch last year. We hosted partnership meetings. All of this to bring attention to the importance of the South Shore locally and throughout the province by engaging individuals and groups. And that engagement process, that's that engagement organizing that Nature Canada has been kind of teaching us to do. I can tell you that we have, Megan might have more recent numbers, but at least 750 supporters now and over 1,200 email addresses in our database. So what happened in 2020? Well, combined with significant help from Nature Canada and Shad Foundation consultants, we got the now famous September 10th announcement of the government's intent to create the Conservation Reserve. 2 years ahead of schedule, the grant money that was provided by the foundation was intended for a 3-year project, and we got it done last year. I will never forget the phone call I got from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks in late August last year, which went along the lines of this. If by some chance the minister was maybe going to make an announcement about the South Shore sometime soon, where do you think he should do that? Could you scout out locations? I immediately hopped in the car, went down and took some pictures around the beach at Point Peter, scouted out how much parking was available, sent that off to them, and that's of course where we ended up on September 10th for the amazing announcement. So victory 2 years ahead of schedule. However, it isn't over till it's over, right? We have since met with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, Ontario Parks Development Team to offer our help and cooperation, and we've established a really good working relationship with them. I can tell you that when the Conservation Reserve is created, it will fall under Ontario Parks and will fall under the leadership of Sandbanks, actually. So Robin Riley, who's the superintendent of Sandbanks, will also have responsibility for the Conservation Reserve. The development team at Parks have almost concluded their research work. They've spent a lot of time on the ground doing scientific research, looking at traffic patterns and who uses trails and who's actually using these areas. And not surprisingly, they have determined that the South Shore fully qualifies from a scientific standpoint to be a conservation reserve. So what's next? Well, in mid-July, that's only a couple of weeks away, there will be publication on the Environmental Registry of Ontario of 2 notices, one which proposes the boundaries for the conservation reserves, which will just be the boundaries as we know them of Ostrander Point and the Point Peter PWA. And the second notice will be concerning regulations to transfer the land from MNRF to Ontario Parks, because the land is currently owned by MNRF, but as a conservation reserve, it'll have to be owned and run by Ontario Parks. So those notices will be coming out in mid-July with a 45-day comment period. After that happens, and assuming that all the comments are positive, and we will be soliciting from all you folks support for that, A formal recommendation package will go to the ministries in November, they say. And this is, by the way, what they call an accelerated track. Doesn't seem that accelerated, but for them, this is accelerated. Once that package is with the ministries, it will be a question of when the ministers feel that it's a big enough priority to proceed, because it will take an order in council, a cabinet, to actually formally create the conservation reserve. We obviously, once we know that the package has gone to ministries, we will continue our advocacy. We'll continue working with Todd Smith, our MPP, to make sure that this happens. And we really feel pretty strongly that this initiative is important to the current government in terms of re-election. And since next year, about a year from now, there will be an election, we would kind of expect then that early 2022 is when the conservation reserve will be formally established. So I think time and circumstances are really on our side here. So once there is that formal designation as a conservation reserve, then the work begins on creating a management plan, and that will involve more public consultation, working with us and other groups, it largely to determine what will be the allowable uses and structure of the conservation reserve. They are, by the way, still looking for a name. It's going to be a single conservation reserve, I guess, with an eastern part and a western part. And they're interested in suggestions for names. So if anyone has any brilliant ideas, let us know. Ssji proposes to play a significant role, and we've proposed to the Ontario Parks team a model similar to the St. William's Conservation Reserve on Lake Erie. Many of you may have attended the Ssji Presents webinar a few months ago when we had Audrey Hagee from St. William's describe how that model works. And in essence, there is a community group which works in partnership with Ontario Parks to manage the reserve. And we think that that would be a great model to follow here. So what else have we been doing, as if that wasn't enough? Well, still concerned, going back to our original mission and priorities, still concerned with private land protection and working with the land trusts. So we keep our eyes open for any time important properties become available, come on the market. Some of you will recall that last year, the lands that Greg Sorbera owns in the South Shore, Half Moon Bay, was up for sale, and a developer from Florida made a proposal to put in a rather major resort there. We mobilized immediately, got a letter writing campaign going, deputations to council and so on. And Mr. Harari kind of ended up leaving the county with his tail between his legs, and that proposal fell apart. Since then, the good part of that is that Greg Sorbera is, the owner, is quite interested in working with us and has committed that at least part of that land, whenever it does get sold, would be kept in some form of protection, preferably the portion which actually is on the coastline of the lake. So we continue to work with situations like that. We had significant input to the county's official plan review and had some great successes there. We were able to get an improved and very acceptable definition of what constitutes major development. We got the wetland buffer zone increased from 30 meters to 50 meters, things like that. So that was a satisfying exercise. We've also had input to key planning applications in natural core areas, which are a new feature of the new official plan. About a third of the county actually is in what are called natural core areas, and that's where major development is generally not going to be allowed. We've continued community engagement. If you're on Facebook, if you follow us on Instagram, look at our material on YouTube. We're constantly posting and engaging people with information. Still on the radar is the national, that should say, marine conservation area. That would be a joint federal provincial exercise. We understand from our friends at Nature Canada that there's no appetite in the federal government right now to look at that for us. So we're just going to keep that on the radar, and that will still be one of the goals at some future point. And of course, I can't forget that we have now established the Hudgen House Restoration Committee. Fundraising has gone on for that quite successfully so far. Grants have been achieved quite successfully. There's a great restoration plan that Edwin Rouse has created, and we're looking to see real work occur on the house this summer and next year. And before you know it, we'll actually be able to use the house as a kind of a field house, small meetings, and a repository perhaps for some Hudgen family memorabilia. And upcoming issue is, or activity will be a fundraising campaign for Ssji itself. One of the outcomes of achieving the declaration about conservation reserves last September was that we now have only one foundation, the Consicon Foundation, interested in continuing to help us with funding on a regular basis. So we have become registered as a charity now as of April the 1st, and we're hoping then to soon launch an important fundraising campaign to raise money for all these activities. It costs money to hire people to do, the media work that we've done and so on. And we also think that we're going to need a war chest to go into the management plan for the conservation reserve going forward, so that we can really participate with the province there. So there's many, many more things we could probably talk about, but I think I'll leave it there, and perhaps open up to questions on this now, and then we'll do the treasurer's report and the election of directors afterwards. So I will. Where's my cursor? Stop sharing my screen. And I see Liz.
Hi, John. I can't help but think how critical it is that the government agreed to finalize the conservation reserve before the next election. I'm sure that the executive has been thinking really carefully about it, but do you feel confident that you can keep the dialogue going and it's not really pressure, but momentum with them, so that other issues don't, beat you to it, so that you make sure that the conservation reserve gets done before the next election?
Yeah, that's absolutely our intention, Liz, and we're laser focused on that, because this is, contrary to popular belief, it is the Conservatives actually who do more in terms of creating conservation properties. I have to be careful what I say, because they do other things that aren't so good. But they do this kind of thing. This is a feather in Todd Smith's cap. There's no question about it. This is a crucial issue for him. The problem is, of course, as you know, we now have two new ministers, Minister Yurek and Minister Yakubuski, who are at least somewhat familiar with the issue, are gone. So we're going to present ourselves to the new ministers and work with Todd. But we really do think that because it is an election year next year, and the Conservatives are determined to retain the rural ridings, at least, that this will be successful. But yeah, we'll have to continue working hard at it. Anybody else? Not seeing or hearing anything, so perhaps then we'll move to the treasurer's report. So Paula Peel is going to present this. I will bring up the report on screen.
Okay, if everyone can hear me, I'll begin, I guess. You can see that there's quite a lot of money here to be handling, and being a treasurer can keep you pretty busy at times, especially when it's time to do the financial report. So to begin, between, let's see, April the 1st, 2020 and March 31st of this year, our total income was $85,651. And this was made up, as you can also see, of grants of $70,460 and memberships and donations, including Hudgen's House, which we categorized as separately, but they add up to about about 15,000. So 85,651 in income. For expenses, they're all broken up. You can see them all on the statement. The total expenses is $70,450. Total income after expenses is $15,201. That's taking the total income of $85,651 minus $70,450 leaves $15,201. Then we add on the net income from the beginning of the year at the start of last year. That was $3,768. So as of March 31st, 2021, our bank balance was $18,969. So that's the financial statement for this year. If there's any questions, John or I might be able to help you. Might help answer them.
Thank you, Paula. Liz has a question again.
Oh,
Oh, I'm always curious. I wondered if, hi Paula, I wondered if you could pull apart the figure for contract expenses, and just to give a little bit more insight into that, not even necessarily with amounts, but just, where did that go?
well, I know the contract expenses include the network organizer, but in addition to that, they also include, no, what is that? I don't know the official titles of these, of our people. Maybe John could tell you that.
Yeah, Megan Miller is the network organizer. And then Dawn Ayer is our communications consultant. So the other big piece, the two big pieces there are Dawn and Megan. And then of course we have amounts for software packages and so on that all go into that.
That's great, thank
Oh,
you.
and sorry, and the videos too, which was Ryan Noth from Cherry Valley.
Any other questions? If not, then I will move acceptance of our March 31st, 2021 financial statement.
Do we have a second?
And oh, yes.
And Liz is
Liz.
going to second. Okay, again, we'll do this reverse approval. Anybody speak up if they don't propose to accept the financials? And seeing none, that passes. Great. So that will now take us to election of the directors. And again, I will share. So Cheryl, are you going to walk us through this?
Yes, I am. Okay, sorry. I'm in and out of the screen here, but the way we run things is that we elect half of our executive board on a yearly basis so that we don't have a whole bunch of new people coming in. So for 2021, the people who are to be elected are John Hirsch, Paula Peel, Jeff Craig, and Myrna Wood. I also have to ask at this time if there is anyone else that is interested in being a member of the board, although I did ask for people to nominate people in writing and I didn't hear from anyone. And just quickly, if there's any other member who would like to join the board, I should ask that now.
So if there is anybody, speak up, please.
Now. And if not, then I am recommending acceptance of the board of SSJI for 2021. And the board members would include the people who are being elected this year, plus myself, Dick Bird, Amy Bodman, and John Foster. So that will be your whole board for 2021.
And is there a seconder? I've got Liz again. She just loves to put her hand up. So again, is there any objection to the elections of the board? Seeing none, well, the board is elected for 2021. Congratulations, everybody. So with that, we'll actually adjourn the formal portion of the AGM and get on to the more interesting part of the night, I think, which is our guest speaker. I suppose I need a motion to adjourn. Somebody would like to speak up. Jeff Craig moves to adjourn, and who's the seconder?
I can second that, Cheryl Chapman.
Thank you, Cheryl. So Jeff Craig and Cheryl Chapman, and I'm sure nobody's going to oppose adjourning. So what I'd like to do now is introduce to you our guest speaker. Leora Berman has a lot of experience in some of the same kind of work that we're doing, so this should be quite interesting. Leora has been leading and developing large-scale ecological projects for nonprofit groups and governments for almost 25 years. She is the 2019 recipient of the Canada Wildlife Federation Roland Michener Award for Outstanding Achievements in Wildlife Research and Conservation. As founder and chief operating officer of The Land Between, she helps guide the charity's many programs and initiatives, which include conducting applied collaborative research and conservation projects and providing education and facilitating public engagement in order to restore habitats and wildlife populations, cultural assets, and economic pillars across the Land Between bioregion. So I give you Leora Berman.
Thanks, Rowan. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So it's really a pleasure to be here with such a great grassroots effort. It's a rarity to see a group like yours come together, and I really hope I can add some value. I had hoped that this could be a discussion. I didn't expect so many people at an AGM, so that's also a nice thing to see. So I'm hoping, even though there's many people on this call, that this can still be a sort of collaborative discussion as we go along. I was asked to give you a bit of background to sorry, there goes something in the office. I was asked to give you a background into some of the conservation programs and projects that I've developed with a great team of wonderful, talented young staff. And in doing so, I thought I'd give you a bit of a hybrid presentation on what the Land Between is and behavior change theory. It's my newest obsession. And because it is the backbone or the foundation of a lot of the work we've been doing. So I'm hoping this brings value to your efforts. And I have to, first of all, thank and honor a really talented young woman named Danielle Lachance, who's a graduate in environmental psychology, and she worked with me for a year, and I learned so much from her. And she's a student of Dr. Lisa Nisbet at Trent University, who coined the term nature connectedness. So I want to thank Danielle for a lot of the information in this presentation. I also, of course, have to thank the Indigenous people of the Ssji, Indigenous people of this territory that the Land Between operates in. Without their knowledge and worldviews and sharing of those, there is no way the Land Between would be able to do what it's doing today. And it has helped grow the Land Between and me personally in ways that are profound. So I would like to honor them as well. So this isn't a standard presentation I give. This is the first time I've put a presentation like this together. So maybe in the comments section, if there are things that you want to ask and come up while I'm talking, feel free to add them there. And here we go. I call this Creating a Culture of Conservation. We're in a new era of conservation with a lot of challenges, a lot of diverse behaviors and viewpoints on the landscape, with people who are really starved for nature and don't have that connection any longer. So the backbone of everything we do is connecting people to nature. So let's see if this can, how do I, there we go. So the goals for the Land Between, and maybe they're similar to your goals, I'm not quite sure, are to create a culture of conservation. So a culture of conservation is prevalent across society. It's not just, and so that's what we're trying to do, create this social norm of conservation. We're trying to improve our services and projects for the public, promote targeted behaviors, so conservation behaviors, and collaborate for overall conservation of this region, similar to your area, the South Shore. You would likely, I'm thinking, want collaborative conservation efforts at all scales and across jurisdictions to help conserve the shore. So first, I'll give you a background on the Land Between governance structure and our operations, because that, the way we conduct ourselves as a charity really translates into how we operate in the world. So our principles and approaches affect all our work. And so the Land Between as a charity is pretty unique in Ontario. As far as I know, we are the first actually in Canada, the first organization to embody the original treaties in our governance structure, in our articles of purposes, in our bylaws, and in our constitution of the charity. So in our framework, we are 60% Indigenous on my board of directors. When the Land Between as a project, it landed in my lap as a project from Kawartha Land Trust and Couchiching Conservancy. They hired me to complete 8 research projects on the region for a Trillium grant, a 1-year Trillium grant. And they knew that I had this habit or propensity to build large projects for the Ministry of Natural Resources, and whoever I worked for, I always build things bigger and collaboratively. And it's very difficult to stay in the government and work like that, because you it's a different kind of beast altogether. And so I left government, and both land trusts hired me to complete the 8 research projects. And I said, well, can I do anything else that I'd like to do? You know, can I build a whole movement and organization? And they said, go for it, Leora. So that's how this started. And a man named Peter Alley was the first one to see this landscape and actually got the 2 land trusts to get this grant and do this research. So I call Peter Alley the rock, and they call me the carver. So anyway, when it came to creating a movement, the first thing I did was picked up the phone and called Curve Lake First Nation and said, can I have a meeting on your res, and can we talk about this region? And that's how this started. At first, because Peter Alley was a professor, and the first sort of steering committee that was brought together were mainly professors, and professors can talk a lot about their own expertise. And so there was a lot of over talk in these meetings, and I got very frustrated, and picked up some display item in the bottom of the Curve Lake First Nation Library. I think it was a bunch of grass or something. And I handed it to one of the professors and I said, here's your talking stick. So no one talk when anyone else is talking, and let's talk and listen while other people are talking. And so we started operating using a traditional talking circle right then and there. And we still operate using a traditional talking circle, and it has reignited this tradition amongst some of the Williams treaties since that time. So that's part of our governance structure. The talking circle is deeply democratic. You can find really robust solutions by listening to very different perspectives. So we are still partnered with Curve Lake First Nation and the William Treaties First Nation. And in growing the Land Between charity, I also grew the Curve Lake Cultural Center pictured here at the same time. So that's a bit about our origins and our governance. We operate according to the 7 grandfather teachings, and those are our principles. The Land Between governance structure is very open. I argued with the lawyers for 2 years before they would enact or send in the documentation to enact the bylaws, because they said there needs to be hierarchy and checks and balances. And I said, well, transparency and absolute transparency where no one can hide anything, such as in a open in-camera talking circle, is the best way to ensure there's a checks and balances. And so we have a unique bylaws that honor the talking circle and that are extremely open and transparent. And in a talking circle, it is very hard to be self-interested because everyone can see your colors. And so it's a really unique structure. And so as I developed the Land Between charity, I also helped develop the Curve Lake Cultural Center. So that's a bit about our background. The 7 grandfather teachings as well talk about respect and humility. And talking circles allow you to hear very different vantages, viewpoints, and that's important because no one is very smart on their own. And of all of that, those teachings in our principles is kindness, the teaching of love, which is really the fuel that makes the earth turn, I think. Okay, so and so that sentiment is throughout, a lot of tolerance. The Land Between as an eco-region, the Land Between is one of the last, it is the last wilderness landscape in Southern Ontario. You've got pockets like the Frontenac Arc, and certainly where you are, there's a little bit in the Hamilton Harbor area, but as a whole region, this is an intact region. So it's the last wilderness region in Southern Ontario. And it was nominated as one of 15 of the community nominated priority places across Canada. So it was awarded a grant 2 years ago from Environment Canada and Climate Change, and one of 15 grants across Canada as a region that's really important to preserve for climate change. The Land Between is an ecotone, so certainly the shore, it's a whole different thing to have an island and a shore, but an ecotone is a meeting place between 2 ecoregions, or the edge of one uniform ecoregion or ecohabitat, or one eco-unit. The edges are called ecotones. And so the Land Between is between, or at the edge of the Canadian Shield and the edge of the St. Lawrence Lowlands. And so it sits right between these two. And indeed it gets its name, not because it sits between, it gets its name from a map from the 1700s at the York University Archives called the Land Between, actually. But it does sit between the Canadian Shield here and the St. Lawrence Lowlands. And so I call it this braided sweetgrass belt. It's this braided belt right across that skirts Ontario right here. It cinches in the skirt of Ontario. As an ecotone, you've got the edge of 2 ecosystems, so it sits between both, and so it has representative species or species from each of those bordering ecoregions. And so ecotones are known for their diversity. So for instance, you'd have species from the north and species from the south, so you have a higher richness of species in an ecotone. You also have really interesting things meeting in the Land Between, like the chemical processes from north and south, such as the acidic water from the north and the Shield, and the alkaline water of the south, or the limestone base from the south. You've got mixed cultural features meeting here. So you've got conservatives meeting liberals primarily. You've got city meeting country. You've got indigenous meeting settler. You've got manufacturing meeting creative. So you've got all these different ABCs of a region all meeting in the land between. So it's unique in terms of its abiotic features, biotic features, cultural features, and economic features as well. So I said that the land between was important for climate change, and that's because it has these, not just greater richness. I tend to describe to the public ecosystems as being Jenga boards. So if you have an intact ecosystem, you've got like all the food web pieces together, all the pieces of the trophic food web, all the different elements of a food web. If you remember grade 3, starting at the base with the bugs and the soils and then the bugs, and then you get up to the bears and the wolves and humans. So you have this pyramid effect in a sense where there's more bugs than there are bears. And when people take away the base of the food webs by spraying for bugs or taking away plants or altering the landscape, they're playing Jenga with this ecosystem. In the land between, we've got greater buffering because we have effectively 3 Jenga boards. We've got one from the Canadian Shield, a whole food web or dynamic trophic system from the St. Lawrence lowlands. And then the land between has unique features of rock barrens and high percentage of water or shoreline to area. So these unique abiotic features of the rock and water and all the wetlands associated with it create conditions for its own flora and fauna. And so we have a 3rd food web here. So we've got greater buffering capacity in the land between than north and south. So that means potentially when the south is out of pollinators, the land between has a reserve of pollinators that might benefit southern Ontario. When the north is losing breeding birds to disperse seeds and control pests, the land between has those breeding birds here that may support northern Ontario. And I'm just dumbing down ecology, but that's basically what I'm talking about buffering capacity. And the land between isn't just a simple ecotone, it's a very complex one, it's a very dynamic one. So for instance, there are different types of patchiness when it comes to ecotones. For example, if you had a grassland and a forest, and you were looking for birds at the edge of the grassland, or let's pretend you were mowing your lawn, even though that's not a natural system, at the edge of the forest, right there at the edge, you'd be bitten to death by mosquitoes more than in the grassland or more than in the forest. And that's because out of the 60 odd mosquito species, I can't remember the numbers in Ontario, there's a grassland loving mosquito species and a forest loving one. And so you've got the overlapping of both. So you've got higher abundance and higher diversity of mosquitoes when you just have this simple pattern. It increases, say you have a little rivulet going through this little region here, and all of a sudden when you're walking along looking for birds, you're bitten to death by 2 kinds of mosquitoes and black flies. So you've got, again, higher richness and higher abundance of species. And then say you had a lake in this little area, you'd be bitten to death by black flies, mosquitoes, and what are they called? Horse flies, deer flies, right? If you had a wetland, like in type 4, you would have, maybe bats from the grassland, but you'd have lots of dragonflies that consume 4,000 bugs in one night. And so you might be okay. It's all in balance. But I'm just showing the point that the higher patchiness of physiographic features and habitats, the greater richness and diversity. And the land between is very patchy. It's a type 4 ecotone. So that means, I'll go back again. That means when I'm going from east to west in the land between, it's got the highest habitat diversity in Ontario. So from east to west, I'm going from alvar to rock barren to lake to river to grassland to lake to meadow to wetland. So, and I'm going from high to low to wet to dry across all these amazing patches of habitats, and it's quite dynamic. So we've got this incredible habitat diversity, which means the species associated with those are in abundance and quite rich. Here's another reason in terms of its resilience. We've got more patches, which reduces the spread of invasive species. I'm not sure why this slide is here. So excuse the picture versus the type. The type means in the patchiness, it's harder for invasive species to spread. So Phragmites for interest, when you're going from high to low and wet to dry, from wetland to alvar to rock barren to meadow to lake, Phragmites has to jump all these different habitats to spread. And so there's this inherent resilience because of the natural edges and patches. So the land between also has greater resilience than other areas. The picture in the slide means to show the different iconic mammals from north and south that you find in the land between. So it's again that higher diversity. It's the meeting of the moose and the deer, the river otter and the woodchuck, the big brown bat and the wolf, and all these overlapping species. So we have these mammals that you only find in the north are found in the land between, and mammals only found in the south are found in the land between. So that was just an example of richness. And in fact, in terms of species in the land between associated with the land between are strongly reliant on them, those would be species at risk. And we have 57 species at risk and counting in this region. I think it's now 58 on the federal, no, 59 on the federal list. How many new species were listed in May? I can't remember now. So it's probably over 60. The other reason the land between is really important for conservation is not just because it has this inherent resilience and all this biodiversity which provides ecosystem services, but my theory of it being important is that we're at the northern limit for all these ectotherms, all these reptiles, such as these turtles. And with climate change, we might be central to their range, not at their normal northern limit as climate change forces things north. And so the land between is already a stronghold for reptiles. We've got roughly 1/3 of Ontario's turtles, 1/4 of Ontario's snakes, 97% of the skink population. And with climate change, this region becomes even more important for these species. There's the habitat richness. I'm not sure how these slides they seem to have gotten a bit mixed up. The writing with the pictures is a bit mixed up. So excuse this. This is the habitat diversity in Ontario done by Simpson's Diversity Index, thanks to Paul Zorn and Parks Canada. And basically what it's showing is in the deepest blue is the highest patchiness of habitats, and then it peters out and it's less and less patchy. That's called beta diversity or habitat diversity. So again, in this blue, which is central in the land between the Shield and the St. Lawrence lowlands, you're going from high to low to wet to dry to alvar to forest to river to meadow to lake, etc. So there's the highest habitat diversity. Also within these, let's see what the next slide brings us. Yeah. So all the pictures seem to have mixed up with the writing, but the land between, just where that habitat diversity, if you look at the top right, that's the rock barrens in Ontario. So the land between has the most rock barrens, sort of it's underlain by all these stepping stones, as Peter Alley would call them, these exposed bedrock. And then in between that is all the water, this hockey stick of water is exactly where the rock is. So this hockey stick shape is the highest percentage of shoreline to area than anywhere else in Ontario. So with that rock and water, we have our own regional species that are linked to this landscape. And those would be these species at risk. Reptiles, golden winged warbler that likes early successional habitats, all these species that congregate to this landscape, golden winged warbler, I said that already, the nightjar species, the aerial insectivores of the common nighthawk, and whippoorwill like to eat flying insects, where you're going to find both the mosquito and the black fly and a whole bunch of really neat flying insects in the land between. So I'm going back and forth. So those are the really neat features of the land between that make it really important, and it has inherent resilience during climate change. But also these species that are found in these stark climates with these rock barrens are already adapted to extremes of temperature and moisture. So it's hoped that because they already know how to survive extremes of temperature and moisture changes, that they could survive climate change as well. And then because these undulations of high to low, wet to dry, as we can see in this picture here, it's also hoped that in these edges, there would be some in situ adaptation. Typically with climate change, species are forced north, but here perhaps the lichens and the herbs can adapt in situ by climbing upward rather than going north. They might find a new microclimate nearby and they don't have to leave the region. If that makes sense to you. So the base of the food web, all the herbs and the decomposers might have some staying power to help other species adapt. Does that make sense? And then the land between is got a lot of water, and many of those are wetlands. And so wetlands are great carbon sinks, as our forests and wetlands support so much diversity within them. So that's the land between. It's a very visible ecotone. This is a measurement, this map here is a measurement of transition in Ontario. So that's the abiotic features transitioning. That means when you go through the land between, you're going up in elevation, and it's very marked when you go through this deep blue. You can see that all of a sudden the water patterns go from not so common to very dense, so that when I reach this blue, I can turn in any direction and within 500 meters, there'd be some sort of water. So these are the transitioning elements. So an ecotone is notable not just for its diversity, but for its as a transition zone. So this deepest blue is where you would see the snow belt, or all of a sudden the snow load would be increasing when you go in the deepest blue. So in this belt that skirts Ontario, things change, things are transformed as they move through this belt, such as the waters being acidic to alkaline. And so it's this sort of osmosis that happens as things transition and move through the land between. It's quite unique. So it has the ability to buffer, simply even chemically, the changes that are happening, or physically in terms of water flows. And so that's why the land between we call it's a land of hope. It's a final refuge. It's primarily intact. It's this final refuge and land of hope because of everything I just described. And so this is why it received federal attention. So the problems with the land between are the problems with most of Southern Ontario. Land development for residential housing. That's the biggest footprint here, and I suspect it's pretty similar where you are. So new roads, a lot of terraforming, people changing the landscape and putting in lawns, removing connections between habitats, and basically taking pieces out of the base of the food web, the Jenga board. We've got increasing aggregate extraction and mining to the aggregates for the new roads. And then we've got increasing recreational use. And I again suspect that your area is similar. It's not for primary residences. Maybe there's a lot of cottaging that happens there, but certainly a lot of recreation when it comes to boating, ATVs and trails, and these can do some damage as well. And then of course, the other direct threat to the biodiversity and resilience of this region is climate change. The indirect threats in terms of how we develop our programs, we look at the other threats. We've got a disconnect to nature. Most people are really disconnected to nature. There's a lack of regional identity, so people aren't aware of the importance of the land between or that they're part of it. And so that's an important thing to design in your programs is that regional identity, because indeed you have your own little region where you are. It's smaller, but it's certainly its own region. There's a lack of policies and governance across the land between in terms of official plans and municipal bylaws that speak to the landscape and its needs. So there aren't soil retention policies. The setbacks for shorelands are just beginning to take shape. In terms of habitat connectivity, that's lacking, and because the municipalities don't know they're part of this region, they certainly don't coordinate. Minor variance approvals, just, if I was to guess, and I'd love to have a docket of how many minor variances there are and are approved, I would guess they're over 90%. Why have an official plan if you're going to approve every minor variance? And very limited enforcement. And I've noticed in this part of Ontario, and I would guess it might be similar to your area. The municipal councils, there's limited capacity to enforce bylaws, but it's not a cultural, it's not part of the culture. And I've talked to council members before, and they say that they don't want to put off the tax base by enforcing bylaws. Isn't that incredible? The other negative impacts when you have that problem with those direct threats and then the indirect threats in terms of human behavior. So it's important to look at both lenses of the direct threats, but also the human threat, that behavioral threat. Then you get these, what you call trophic cascades. You take the wrong pieces or too many pieces out of these Jenga boards and they collapse. You could have locally collapsing ecosystems such as wetlands locally. You could have population declines and local extinctions of turtles, for instance. And because of that, you have reduced ecosystem services, reduced quality of these habitats. So when you're designing programs, or when we did, we outline our target audiences. So we already have the conservation sector is quite aware of the land between, but maybe not, we don't have as much awareness of who we are and how we do things. Then we, of course, we wanted to target community groups and service clubs, municipalities. So you can just list who you wanted to target, but these were our targets. Permanent and seasonal residents require 2 different languages sometimes. And then we really are interested in mentoring youth and having them on our board of directors. We do have 1 youth on our board of directors, and creating a youth arm for all our programming, because if you look at all our ages at this table, none of us are young. Where are they? So it's a really important thing to design things for youth. So now I want to get to quickly behavior change. If I haven't lost you, I know I'm talking a lot and I hope it would be shorter, but so I'm recently obsessed with behavior change because it's whatever we're doing is not working, clearly. And I know that it is a David and Goliath situation where conservationists have to attack the Goliath of money in terms of marketing and the behemoth aesthetic that Cottage Life magazine has put out and everyone else has put out, with everything terraformed and all these fiefdoms or fiefdoms that people seem to want because they are promised this quote unquote American Canadian dream. So I understand that it's a challenge, but this is again why I think behavior change is kind of neat, because there's lots of hope and lots of opportunity. So I wanted to teach you what I learned from working with these marvelous people, Dr. Lisa Nisbet and Danielle Lachance. So this is why we work with behavior change. Most people do research, outreach, and education. So most conservation groups do these 3 things. And that's because all these things really are reliant on legislation. If you research it and you find the turtle, well, then that wetland's protected. Or if you've protected it as a conservation reserve, then nothing's going to harm it. And you're relying on that legislation and designation, et cetera. And that equals conservation. Well, what happens when the legislation is taken away, or people don't respect it, or people don't honor it, or it's not enforced? And those 3 things are happening today. All the legislation, not all of it, but a lot of important legislation has been gutted by this current, effectively made, castrated effectively by this government. And a lot of people from in the last years of what's happened in the United States and whatever is trickling across the world here, this ripple effect, there's a lack of respect for laws and legislation and lawmakers. So I don't want to rely on legislation or designations. So with behavior change, if you apply behavior change in how you run your business and do your programming, then you're speaking to the people, right? And you're actually addressing the core issues. And so it doesn't matter if legislation's taken away, because you have behaviors that equal conservation. So this is why we design things this way. So a little bit about behavior change. Most people think knowledge equals behavior. That's not the case. there's a dear, dear man who is spent his entire career educating people. Gray Merriam is one of the best men I know. He's in Kingston, Frontenac area, and he is a professor at Queen's University, now retired. He was on the Frontenac Stewardship Council for God knows, probably 30 years. What a marvelous man. And and we are seeing now, and so is Gray, that knowledge doesn't change behavior. So what's going on? There's always some sort of barrier that we need to understand between these two things. The second misconception is that attitudes or values equal behavior. Well, people don't know themselves too well. I used to think that I was a cool cucumber. I am no cool cucumber. I bite the hook every time. I have an attitude when it comes to authority. I mean, I've had to see these things. And so it's not attitudes or values that change behavior, because who we think we are and what we do are often very different. So there's also a barrier between these two. It could be self-evaluation, it could be a number of things, but there is often a barrier between the attitudes and the behavior. So this is the other thing we need to sort of chew on and explore. The third is that if we give them money, it'll affect behavior change. That's actually not necessarily true. And when you take the money away, the economic incentive might change behavior and you might get conservation, but when that money is gone, what is going to motivate that behavior? So it's very actually dangerous to use economic incentives to rely on behavior change. Okay, so what are the pathways we've chosen to pro-conservation behaviors? The biggest and best one is reconnecting people to nature. And Indigenous people could tell you this. Look at the compelling power of their stories and their teachings. And they are all nature-based. We inherently are kin with nature, whether we think we are not, whether we've grown up in New York City. Humans are animals, and humans, by the grace of how we are created, are connected to this earth in ways that are profound. So we just need to connect people back to nature. There are ways to measure how people are connected with nature, and we do this in our surveys. This is, I forgot the name of this chart, but it's to measure how people feel, how close people feel to nature and their attitudes. And some people might say they don't enjoy being outdoors, they don't like bugs, and how connected they are. But regardless of how disconnected we think we are, nature is a powerful gateway drug to conservation. So nature-related people engage in more pro-conservation behaviors. So the more you can get people related to nature, whether it just be bird feeding. If someone in the city doesn't like bugs, but they get a pet bird, and they understand, or they start to bird watch out their window, that connects them to nature. So the more connected they are, the more apt they are to engage in pro-conservation behaviors. They're happier and they're more altruistic, they're more hopeful. And I think that right there says a lot about where the world is, because people spend 90% of their time indoors in the world. The loss of nature words in the Oxford Dictionary in England, the word otter was taken out of the dictionary and jump drive was inserted. It's amazing how many words are not used anymore by mainstream first world countries when it comes to nature. And there are fewer references to nature in pop culture. If you were to watch television, you rarely see nature anymore. You see offices and buildings and cities, but most things on that tube don't have nature in them. Even Star Wars doesn't have nature on Earth, it has nature on other planets. So here's just some more stats. So up to 9 hours using electronic media per day, and I'm quite sure that's increased since COVID. Meanwhile, being in nature increases mood, life satisfaction. People feel more autonomous and alive, and just overall happy. So the well-being people increases when they're connected to nature. And even communicating this to people is important. It's interesting that people have gravitated to the countrysides because of COVID, and the development is going through the roof up here in the Highlands. I don't know if it's happening near you, but it's not to connect with nature, it's to be away from people and look at nature. And that's really unfortunate. So let's see if we can design things to get them out of those big kingdom houses. To connect people with nature, you can do passive and active activities in nature. So forest bathing. People can just sit in a forest and feel connected to nature. And people report being happier outdoors than indoors. Another way to connect people to nature, whether it's actively going for a walk or forest bathing, or sitting and observing nature, that's another way. Having kids look for different flowers in a field, or having adults look for spring flowers. These are ways to connect people to nature. It doesn't have to be some awesome experience. It could just be a little, today we're going to sit in this area and you're going to learn about spring flowers. And you're going to collect a bouquet of non-at-risk flowers. And there's no training needed. Outdoor environmental education, great. Collecting bugs, bug kits that you see here. Participation in community science is extremely powerful for both kids and adults in terms of connecting with nature. And then even art. So let's sit in this meadow, collect flowers, and how about drawing them? Let's make music to nature. Any of these things gets people back to nature. It's so simple and yet so profoundly effective. So that's all you have to do in terms of your portfolios. But I want to teach you a bit more about what influence behavior. So nature connectedness is 90% of the way there, right? But you want to keep people there, and you want to keep them actively stewarding and caring for nature. So these are just different tips, again, that I learned to design effective programs. So the tips are, there are internal factors to behavior change that the person feels intrinsically as part of themselves, and they're external. So the ones that are really, that you can trigger in terms of internal factors. So internal factors are knowledge, attitudes, values, emotions, responsibility, skills, and ability. So people might feel responsible to nature, and that's an internal motivator for them to take action. Some people don't feel that, but other people do. It's very hard to influence intrinsic motivators except for emotions. Stories are extremely powerful. So nature is very powerful in its ability to heal and help and inspire, and stories are really powerful in terms of getting people to emotionally connect. So telling my story or my personal story about saving a turtle or someone running over a turtle, that's very powerful. Or a story about, we've got a turtle in Haliburton that I named Grace. She's a one-eyed turtle that's likely over 125 years old based on her size, based on the research. She lives downtown Haliburton. I called her Grace because she's got one eye and she survived all these years crossing 3 major highways. And so I did a campaign called Saving Grace and told the story of Grace. So that if you can connect emotionally through stories about nature and your experience with nature, that's a really great way of influencing people. So I'm just giving you these things because you can design anything with these tools. I don't know that I'm designing things, extremely well, but this knowledge has helped our programming immensely. The other thing that helps is skills and ability. People can have general knowledge, they can be emotionally motivated, they can feel a responsibility to nature to take care of it. But if they don't have the skills and ability, that's gone. So we tell stories to get the emotions going. So we have a lot of on our social media where we like to show for the youth. We've got a TikTok with young faces telling their stories, because we want youth to engage in nature. People like to see themselves in others. And then in terms of skills and ability, we teach them everything from identification to tiered programming for turtles, for instance, how to identify a turtle, all the way to how to excavate a nest. And guess what? You're on our research permit. So when people feel that they are knowledgeable, but they have enough knowledge to feel skilled, then that translates and they show off about that. And that makes them feel like heroes and capable. Then there are external factors that you can influence, whether people can easily access these things, cues or prompts to change behaviors, such as all the chocolate shiny bars that are placed on the checkout counter. I mean, this is stuff that corporations use all the time. We just haven't used it in the conservation sector. But corporations know how to use storytelling, and they know how to teach people how to use their smartphones, and so skills and ability. And anyway, so social norms is what we can influence. If you get enough of a groundswell of people doing something, it becomes a social norm. And we are monkey see, monkey do. The more people do, the more we copy. We want to be part of the group. And so the more of social groups that continually practice these behaviors, you're creating social norms. And the other thing is external factors, setting goals. And so this is, the school system somehow has taken away these goal setting, because they don't want to see students feel like they're failing. So you don't need to necessarily reach a certain grade point average to pass a class. This has been taken away in our school systems, but goal setting is really important for humans, and so is failing. So for instance, in Turtle Guardians, one of the programs, we have level 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't get to, for kids, we have Turtle Camp. You don't pass Turtle Camp until you take the turtle test. Too bad. You want the Turtle ID card, or you want the Turtle Guardian membership card, you've got to pass that test. You want to be on our research permit, you've got to pass the training. So actually these goals are really important, because humans are naturally competitive. And even if we compete with ourselves, we feel very skilled and proud when we've reached goals. So making things accessible, but also dangling that carrot of the next level is kind of a neat thing to do. And then people love feedback. So that's rewards, reinforcement, encouragement, that kind of feedback. How they did, that's the reinforcement. Oh, I'm going around in circle. Okay. So so it's one thing to start a behavior. How do you keep a behavior? So we're talking about habits here. How do people form habits? And I just go over this really quickly. You need a prompt or a cue. The person needs to desire that action. So that's, again, the chocolate bar. How do you make it desirable? You can make it desirable with showing kids that other kids are doing it, showing adults that other adults are doing it, showing happy faces. You could make it desirable because it's socially inclusive and people feel lonely, etc. So you've got to make whatever it is desirable, and then you've got to show them what action they can do. So they have to understand the action to take. So for instance, this problem with boats and say the zebra mussel, and no one, or even spiny water flea, no one washing their boats. There's a queue at all the boating stations, but there's nothing makes it desirable. It's a lot of work. You don't see other people washing their boats. You don't see videos of it. There's no one smiling with a picture washing their boats. There's no reward, and there's no showing people how to do the boat washing, or there's no place to do it in. So you haven't hit all these parts of how a habit is formed. And then the result is a clean boat. But there's the cue, but you've got to follow through. I'll give you some more slides as an example. So for the habits, you have to encourage people. It has to be easy and rewarding to do. So you have to decrease the barriers and increase the benefits of that action for it to become a habit. It has to be easy to replicate. I'm talking overtime, so I'm trying to go faster. It also has to be obvious. So again, the sign at the boat launches with the invasive species, it isn't obvious in terms of what they're supposed to do. It would be, if it was 1, 2, 3, 4, pick up the hose, wash it, move your boat off the shore, wash it here, and then it's much easier for people to do. It's obvious and easy. And then it's rewarding. You could have a little, once they're finished using the hose, it could be a little song that plays on some sort of, who knows, computer that says thank you. That's simple. So these are things you need to do to get people on board on any program. And you keep those things up. You keep the cues up, the reminders, until it becomes a habit. You make it easy for them to win, and you always reward them or show them the benefits of their actions. And all these cues and prompts shouldn't necessarily be rude. So penalty for running over a turtle, that isn't necessarily effective. There's also this weird thing that if you speak in the negative and you say all these people littering are ruining the environment, or some sort of sign that people go with the many. So if all people are doing it, they're going to do it too. The message can't be a negative, because it will just fail, because people follow the masses. They don't stand out. So if you're saying the masses of people litter, well, oh well, so many people are doing it, I'm going to do it too. The reward isn't feeling better going against the grain. So, and humor is a great way to do things too. And again, easy, to make things easy. So if you want to get people into birding, there's amazing birding apps. There's this birding apps and birding feeders. So this bird feeder actually has an app and has a camera on it, and it sends you an alarm when there's a bird at your feeder. And that's something that's easy to do. Or if you want someone to say pick up litter, if they regularly go to the dump on Thursdays, then they can do that on the way to the dump. Or if you want them to check their bird feeder, you put the bird feeder on the way to the car, on the way to the garage. Or I'm not thinking of great ideas right now, but that's called habit stacking. If they're going out to the boat launch anyway and they have to get gas, then that's where they would access native plants, or that's where they could pick up a reporting form for whatever they've seen that day. It has to be convenient and easy. And then of course, rewarding. Recognition is really important, even for people who are insular and hermits like myself. Recognition is always great. So that could just be a letter of thank you. That could be an email of thank you. Some people like greater recognition. They like to be on television, videos, websites. That's always good too. A little shout out on social media, etc. And of course, social celebrations of all your volunteers are great too. Okay, and this is where the discourage. So to discourage something, if you want it to discourage something, for instance, with recycling, you would with garbage throwing. So if you want them to recycle, you put the recycling bin closer to where they are and the garbage bin far away. So they're going to recycle first before they're going to throw it in the garbage. That's just what we're trying to say here, what I'm trying to say through here. So if a behavior becomes difficult, if it's difficult to find periwinkle at a greenhouse, they're not going to plant it, and you might have native plants at the front of the store and other stuff at the back. Those I'm just using very dumbed down examples because I think my brain is a little tired tonight. But yeah, I'll try and think of other ones as we go along. Unsatisfying. So these are things you want to discourage, basically. And that's how you discourage them. So the other thing I'll talk really briefly about is motivation. And this is new to me, but it was pretty interesting. And I'm just give it to you for interest's sake, because it's a whole theory of motivation. And some people are just not motivated to do anything in terms of conservation. And then some people, this is the scale of motivation. So there are people who are motivated, then to go up the scale, they are motivated just to get an outcome. Then it becomes because they feel like they should, there's a responsibility. And then they know it's important. And then because it reflects who they are and their values, and because it's what they enjoy. So I wanted to show you the scale because you're trying to get people from one end to the other end. And I thought it was a pretty interesting scale to share with you. So again, to review some of this, make things obvious, encourage positive behaviors, and showcase that desired behavior. So if lots of people are doing something, then other people will follow. So if you have activities, do them loud and proud, and so other people can see them and want to be part of them. This is another thing, to influence people to get things, to create social norms. People are influenced by their circles and who they're close to. So you join different Facebook groups and talk to them in their language and listen to what they say. And their friends will refer them. You can go to the Lions Club or the Rotary and start talking to them. And people are influenced by those people they're close to. They're influenced by many. So again, if all people litter, they're going to follow and litter too. If all people are bird watchers, then hey, oh, I live on this island, I better be a bird watcher. And then they're influenced by the powerful. And the powerful doesn't mean people with money and people who are famous. The powerful means people who are respected. So there's a difference. So if you have champions for your cause, if you can find people who are well respected, it could be an elder lady in the community who's always been known for her baked goods. She's a powerful person in that community. So those are ways to get people on board. Okay, rewards. Some people do things because they are already motivated to, and if you give them rewards like gifts or stuff, that actually turns them off. It's kind of interesting because they were going to do it anyway, and now they feel that you've undermined their intentions. So the awards could be praise and public recognition and plaques, but watch gift giving, or incentives. Okay, I think I've talked enough about these. I can't remember. Oh yeah, autonomy. People don't want to be told what to do. They want to make their own choices. So when you make them feel like they're an authority on something because you've given them knowledge and also the skills, then you've got to let them make their own choices. And so you don't put pressure on them. You give them choices. And that's really important. That sort of very light touch. And again, that feeling of competence. The autonomy and competence go together. So they want to feel skilled and knowledgeable. And if they're competent, then they can make their own choice about how to treat their backyard or what to do about the bird habitat or not. And then they want to feel related to others. So this is over and over again, that they're a part of an inclusive environment and their social interaction, and they're respected for who they are. Okay, so the take-home messages are to foster that connection with nature, to increase people's skills and abilities. You can increase or decrease their habitats by making it difficult to do their old habitats and and easy to do their new habits. And fostering intrinsic motivation is that competence again, and that own challenge. So just a bit about our programs. So this is how we designed our programs. So turtles are imperiled. They take about 60 years to replace themselves. The population's dumped by more than 50% in Ontario, and it is a pretty scary situation for keystone species. They might not go extinct because they're long-lived, but certainly there could be local extinctions, and the ecosystem services they provide are going to diminish drastically. They spread seeds and biodiversity and cycle nutrients, and they clean water, help clean pathogens from water. So, and they're our connection to the past. I can't say enough about turtles. They were here, they are effectively walking dinosaurs in a sense. Turtles I think, have the power to get anyone connected to nature. And again, our target audiences are municipalities, communities, kids. So here's our prompts. We give our volunteers, they feel very proud to wear these vests. On the left, research in progress. It looks very serious. These vests are in partnership with the municipalities. They've given us permission to be on the roadways. And so the volunteers feel loud and proud. I see them wearing these in grocery stores and on their days off and whatever. They're just so proud to be part of this. And that's a form of a prompt for other people and for recognition. We have different skill sets for turtle guardians. So we've got road researchers and nest sitters and wetland watchers and crossing guards and tunnel assessors. And it's up to you what you want to do. Nest sitters, you're just on call to babysit a nesting turtle, but you feel very skilled. We give you all the tools and training, and that training is online and you can take it on your own, or you could get personalized training with a biologist. And so we've got this translation of turtle guardians teaching other turtle guardians in the community. And within, I guess it's been a year and a half, maybe 2 years since we really started rolling this program out, we've got 562 turtle guardians and counting. So it's amazing because the other prompts we have is we give the kids, especially love this, a little MasterCard or Visa looking membership card after they pass their turtle test, and they show this off to their friends. And again, these are some of our community volunteers. They're just so proud to monitor this section of road. We make it easy for them because we've developed a Rep Taylor's app. There's amazing university programs now, and kids will develop apps for you. So this is to report any turtles from the Turtle Guardians on their roads. We've got a general app for the public called the Turtle Guardians app, but this is just for our volunteers. So they have their own app and it makes it easy for them. When people save turtles, we give them a You're a Turtle Hero card, which gives them more about our information. And so, and then we throw them a barbecue every year, and I thank you, and everyone gets recognized. So everyone gets some sort of dummy prize of, you know, turtle cookie or something that sort of suits their personality. And so it's becoming a social norm in Halliburton, for instance. People see these people every day, every morning, and people call me up to join and hang out. And this woman, Judy, has cancer. This man has been stuck here. He lives in the Philippines. His wife and son are there, and he came to visit his mom when she was sick in March of last year, and he's now stuck here. And so he's been very depressed and lonely without his wife and child. And so, you know, it's become a social thing. We've got 3 other members who are on disability, and 2 of them have cancer, who patrol this section of road, and they're all buddies. It's really neat. The other programs we've done are, again, there's always that element of skill development. So nightjar surveys, and then for the schools, we're putting up MODIS towers. So MODIS towers track the migration of birds. And so you can track a bird flying all the way from Florida or Mexico up to here, and you can see it flying. It's extremely powerful. And we've got people who survey routes and listen for whippoorwills, and we make it a romantic thing or things for your kids. You just go out one night, twice in the summer in June, and you listen for whippoorwills and you report to us, and then you can get access to our MODIS towers and see what's going on with whippoorwills. So really, really simple, but again, it makes people feel really, it makes them feel like experts. It's an easy choice to make, and then they learn more about whippoorwill habitat. And then for the public, we can show them, you know, the birds that are coming up to the land between and what habitats they prefer. Other programs we have, frag fighters. So this is again to eradicate Phragmites, and we're working on a sponsorship where a team of frag fighters, so they're teams of 4, the local microbrewery would give them a free appetizer after they fight Phragmites, because they're the frag team. So those kinds of things, and they have their own vests, so the public sees what they're doing and they feel like champions. Wetland Watchers is part of Turtle Guardians, but it's actually evolved to be part of Hunters, the Harvesters and the Wolf program, and bridging divides between the harvesters and the wolf biologists to find more data. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. And then on the one thing that we have anthropomorphized quite strongly is the Eastern hognose snake. We say, have you seen the drama queen of the land between? We've got a program called Snake Supervisors, makes people feel like they have authority over the snakes. So it conquers their fear, and it's to monitor snakes. The cool thing about anthropomorphizing, I mean, she is a drama queen of a snake, it makes her less threatening. But I want to caution you about anthropomorphizing nature, because nature inherently, I mean, it's a whole trophic system. So, you know, the chipmunk will eat the warbler's birds and or chicks, for instance. And so, or anyway, so the problem is that then people start to hate the chipmunk. So you want to be careful who you anthropomorphize, but we thought there would be no problem anthropomorphizing a snake because everything's going against them right now anyway. So that's another way we, so now people report if they've seen the drama queen of the land between. This is a project as well using all of those behavior change theories. It's a very deliberately, it's a calculated program. It's an eco-label that lake associations would get, and you only need to have 3 people on your lake association to fly the Blue Lakes flag. It's based on the Blue Flag program, marinas and beaches, but it's designed to be in the vernacular of the city because it's a label, and people from the city don't have a lot of time, and they understand labels and they understand status. And so if you are to follow or achieve 6 of 7 goals every year, and the goals are very easy to achieve out of 7 categories, then you maintain the label as a blue lake. And it's a status symbol, and it actually has implications for lake culture because people who participate in the Blue Lakes project have a certain culture, and it communicates to others what their values are, because there's a unified umbrella which everyone stands under, or a unified platform of being a blue lake and stewarding their lake. It has implications for having a greater voice at the table with municipalities against development. It helps keep lake properties buoyant, and it's not because of the condition of the lake, it's because of the culture of the lake, because people know if they're moving to a lake that flies the Blue Lakes flag, there's a culture of stewardship and caring for the lake, and so that's what keeps properties buoyant, property prices buoyant. The Blue Lakes project is quite complicated, but it integrates all those behavior change principles, and so again, really easy cues, easy evaluation. There's that Blue Lakes app and a scorecard to score yourself against the goals to see how you're doing. There's recognition in terms of flying the Blue Lakes flag, and also in terms of spokespeople on this project. So that's something you can explore later. And then very simple. So these projects are not complicated. They're very simple, and they integrate all these different things that we've learned. And so the Land Knowledge Circles project is simply getting people together from communities and schools talking in a circle about nature. And it is extremely powerful, because I've noticed that since I've grown up, there are no more community meetings. People don't discuss things at all. They usually throw stones over the wall, whether you're left or right or green or blue or whatever color they think you are. And there's no deep dialogue about what's behind that. And in a talking circle, as I said, it's really hard to be self-interested. People have to listen to you. And because you're holding a talking stick or feather, and you are being witnessed by so many people, it tends to be a pretty authentic exchange. And so this builds community like nothing else. And so if you design programs, it's cool to have meetings in talking circles. And maybe you'll find out ways to design them better, or with all the volunteers to have a barbecue and a talking circle. After turtle camp, we hold turtle camp, we have all the kids sit in a circle and we pass around a turkey feather and they tell us their favorite parts of turtle camp and their favorite turtles. And they feel so honored to be in that venue, because there's nothing like the human face in terms of something that's compelling. People like looking at people more than anything else. So to look at a live human being is pretty powerful, and to be heard by another one is extremely powerful. So we hold land knowledge circles because the relationships that after 3 hours together in a community hall talking about what's happening in Marmara, the networking that goes on is incredible. The solutions that are found to problems, the new understanding for different perspectives is incredible. And I said I'd go back to the wolf. Well, the wolf portfolio is extremely political and very sensitive because the language is spoken by biologists versus harvesters, two different languages. And then the media takes a little snippet of that and it turns it into a nightmare of miscommunication. And so we held talking circles with biologists and harvesters about the wolf for the last year. And now the biologists and harvesters are participating on a community science project together for the wolf and to figure out what's going on in the forest ecosystems. That's pretty profound for a relationship that was that broken. So that's our last program. Oh, and then we have little programs. I mean, I could talk forever. Again, it's all autonomy, skill. So you can sample, you can design your own shoreline garden with us or get a highland habitat health checkup for your property. And basically for the shoreline gardens, we're teaching you about the land between, and you get to choose your own plants and aesthetic and color palette, et cetera, and you walk home with a custom design. And so people feel like they've made the choice and they can choose to plant it or not. And they've walked home with amazing skills and a feeling of competence. And the same thing with highland habitats. It's like a health checkup for your property, and they feel like they've learned about their property, and they can choose whether or not to follow the recommendations. Okay, and that's my talk for this evening. So the take homes are: get people outside, keep it very grassroots. You don't want to get too big for your britches and talk above people. I've noticed that with some agencies, and people don't feel like they're included any longer. Kindness, and what I mean by kindness is I get angry probably every week about, we call them idiots, we call them cottagers, about the slaughter of, but you've got to remember people are not connected to nature, so they're not seeing, so you can't judge them that quickly. And you always have to meet people where they are. So, walk the extra mile to them rather than expecting them to meet you halfway, and understand where they're at in their perspective. And then partnerships. We partner, so for the Turtle Guardians program, with all the road crews, with service clubs, with the schools, with just, anyone can be an eco hero, with florist companies, with with whoever we could partner with. And then those social rewards are really, really amazing, because if you just let people, you give them the skills and they feel competent and you let them go, they're going to transfer your efforts. And it becomes socially rewarding once you let people meet other people. The skills and knowledge, and then sharing experiences. So between your experience and our experience, I can't wait to hear what your experience is going forward, because I mean, there's many ways to cook a cake, I guess, cook a turkey. I don't know. That's my presentation. So I hope that's been helpful. And I've lost about 10 of your participants, John, because I talked too long.
Well, thank you so much, Leora. There we go. That was absolutely awesome.
My pleasure.
That was like 2 or 3 presentations in one. Started out learning all about the land between, which I hadn't known before I was introduced to you. And you can keep those 60 varieties of mosquitoes. We have enough of them. We don't need any more down here in the south.
Very
And
good.
I do have to say that Blanding's turtle is ours.
Oh, okay.
And not so sure you can have them because they have been the savior of the South Shore. We'll tell you the story someday, perhaps. But that was just amazing. So much to unpack and to see how far along you are. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of money involved in making all this happen and an awful lot of organization.
There's not a lot of money actually to make this happen.
Really?
Really. I always use, I work with students and internship programs, wage subsidized programs. Our budget last year was the best it's been ever. Was about 500,000, but I built the land between on a budget of 100,000 a year.
Well, that's still lots of money.
Okay, all right.
But I mean, it just shows you, what
Okay, relative, right?
Just shows you absolutely what can be done. So, anybody have any questions for Leora? I know that's a tremendous amount to unpack. This is going to be posted on our YouTube channel so people can rewatch. I don't know if you'd be prepared to send us your slide deck, Leora, because we might use it. We could
Absolutely,
use that.
and I'll be sure to put Danielle Lachance's name in it there because I really should honor her and Dr. Lisa Nesbitt. So I will do that for sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, maybe. I really hoped it would be of value to your efforts. I really admire the momentum that you have already, the initiative you've taken. I think it's wonderful. And even if you start with the simplest, flower project, it's amazing how people can gravitate around one species.
So anybody have any questions, or are we just all full up with information already? I've got Liz.
I just have to ask, Leora, how long have you been at, when did you start the land between?
So I started when I was hired to do that, finish that little project, or that was 2000 and what is it now? 2005, the winter of 2005. Yeah.
That is still very.
And it's still very what?
Still, it's very impressive. What you have achieved in that time. It's incredible.
Thank you. I still don't think it's enough but again, I always have to remind myself it's a David and Goliath thing. And certainly I have to say it's in the last 2 years where we've really built these community science programs, and I learned more about behavior change, that I've seen the most uptake of anything I've done. And it's that social, these volunteers are so proud. And I just, so the president of the Lions Club came to visit on a Sunday and said that one of his volunteers told him he has to come here to see how everything works. And when you get things like that happening, it's really neat. So
yeah, it's never over, like you said. Anybody else?
That's okay. I'm tired too.
Well, I'm going to thank you again. That was absolutely amazing, and look forward to, I think internally on the board and so on, we can work with a number of these concepts.
Well, I hope so.
As you noticed, we're looking ahead now to a management plan for the conservation reserve, and working with the province and seeing how much latitude we will have, and some of those concepts I think are going to be very helpful.
Yeah, and if you have a groundswell of volunteerism and people connected to the area under you, nothing could stop you. And
Well,
that's the goal. That's the goal. We need to keep this growing, this conservation movement growing.
Well, that's how we feel. So again, thank you so much.
Great.
And I guess,
I
yeah.
hope you keep in touch and you tell me what you're up to, and whether it's a snake program or a bug program or a forest bathing program or an art program, whatever you do, I'd love to hear about it.
Good. We certainly will, and look forward to following your work as well.
Okay.
So everybody, with the South Shore Joint Initiative, I think we're done for this evening. That was a remarkable evening. And I wish everybody a good night. Thank you all so much.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.